When people think of slavery in America, for most people they think of slavery down south in states like Georgia, Virginia, and Mississippi. But really, there was also slavery in northern states like Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island that most people don't know about. Slaves lived in northern America throughout the whole colonial period and before the American Revolution. The reason many people didn't know about this is because the South had a much larger population for slaves. Because there were such fewer slaves in the North than the South, it was less noticeable and less severe. During the 1700s, there was an estimated 1 African for every 4 white families in the northern state. The most common slave owners were ministers, doctors, and merchant elite. There were also many slaves that were forced to do household work as well as a skilled job. Examples of some jobs that were common for slaves were carpenters, shipwrights, goldsmiths, bakers, tailors, printers, and blacksmiths. Many slaves were found in almost every economic department in the northern economic life. Many free white Americans were at a loss of a job because many people hired African Americans over whites because of their talent in crafts. Over the years, the number of slaves in New England kept rising. In 1708, there was about 1,000 slaves. In 1730, there was about 5,000 slaves. In 1750, there was about 13,000 slaves. Because New England was the center of the slave trade in the colonies, they shipped Africans to the South and the Caribbean. The first U.S. Census counted 13,059 free blacks in New England and 13,975 in New Jersey, New York, and in Pennsylvania in 1790. None of the free blacks were actually free for their lives. They had political, economical, and social rights. Many Africans were considered servants because shipping Africans was valuable, which means they were able to be free in a certain number of years. For about 200 years, unlike in the South, the North did not rely on slaves for agricultural labor. The North trained and diversified its slaves, forced to meet its needs for a more complex economy. Unlike in the South, the North was not fully dependent on slaves. Slaves were about 30% of the population in South Kingston, Rhode Island, about 10% in Boston, about 9% in New London, and about 7.2% in New York. In 1775, when the Minutemen marched to Lexington to face the Redcoats, the people left back in Framingham, wives, boys, and old men, barred themselves in their home with clubs, pitchforks, and axes because of the rumor that the local slaves were going to rise up and massacre the whites while the militia was away. Many famous American heroes that changed America were involved with the slave trade. Many people did and still don't know about this. Some examples are when Abraham Lincoln's family lived in Pennsylvania during colonial times, they owned their own slaves. Lincoln's anti-slavery Secretary of State during the Civil War, William Henry Seward's family owned slaves when they lived in Orange County, New York, and was surrounded with slave-owning neighbors. Slavery in the North happened weekly or even daily. Slaves were auctioned in the market houses of Philadelphia, in the background of Congregational churches in Rhode Island, in Boston taverns and warehouses, in merchant coffee houses in New York. Many people think there are little to no slavery in the North, either because they honestly didn't know or they don't want to believe it. For more information, please visit slavenorth.com, slaveryinNewYork.org, and medfordhistorical.org/New England Slavery.